So we are actually next month going to have a panel that she's pulling together, and I'm going to let her talk about it. And she's going to give you a little sneak peek about what we're going to see next month. Yeah, okay, so here's Desiree Myers. She's also a very good friend of
mine. You probably know me a little bit from Preserve PVE, a local group. There's a couple members here, Shelley and Judy, that are part of the group as well. There's others. It's centered in Palos Verdes Estates, and we put out a newsletter called preservepve.org. If you go there, you can sign up for the newsletter. We advocate good governance practices. And those good governance practices include local control, fiscal responsibility, and transparency. Transparency really, and governing for the will of the people. And those practices are shared by bipartisan interests. Our group is bipartisan. And that's what we do. We reach across the aisle to make sure that everybody understands we're all talking about the same thing. And so it gets over those labels. So today is about local control of land. And what California has been doing is passing laws that force density. Well, what does that mean? That means they're overriding your local control of what your city councils have in place, their zoning regulations. What's an example of that? Well, one of the over 200 laws that they've passed in the last 5 years or so is AB 2295. And we were just talking about that earlier. It gives the school board the right to overrule the local zoning of each city and put in workforce housing, replacing our children's school playgrounds and their sports fields with workforce housing, which can house anyone actually. It can start with teachers, but they can house anybody that they want. And it requires, in order to override the local school zoning to do this, it requires 4 of the 5 people to vote for it. So when you look at the candidates that are running, one of the questions you're going to have is, how would you vote on something like that? Because we probably already have 4 of 5 already in place on the school board today that would do it. So this brings into importance as to who's elected and whether or not we hit that 5th. But that would require that they pass a school bond to pay for the development. Now, a school bond is going to be proposed from the school district to help our schools. But that money, infrastructure money, can be repurposed for workforce housing instead of fixing up our schools, unless the ballot explicitly says cannot be used for workforce housing, including any matching funds from the state. So consider that if you see this ballot coming up, because you will. So just a little bit of background. You're hearing some words coming up and wondering, wait, what changed here? Well, in the last 5 years, density laws have started to pass, mostly since 2017. In 2019, the California declared a housing crisis, and that allowed them, defining it as a crisis, an emergency, to start overriding local constitutional limitations. And so now they're using this emergency crisis to do that. In 2021, they started eliminating environmental laws. Environmental laws are called CEQA, and that has to do with your safety, and that has to do with protecting coastlines. They're now also overriding our Coastal Commission, which we voted into power in the state of California by a proposition. I don't know how it's legal they're doing this, but they're starting to get out their power. Why? Because the most expensive land is on the coastline, and they're targeting the coastline in particular. So they need to take away those protections because that's where the money is. If you want to know how the money flows, look at opensecrets.com, and you'll see that the money is flowing from the developers and the investors into the politicians' re-election campaigns. One of the challenges that we have is a chokehold on our Sacramento, because overwhelming majority, of course, we have 2/3 control, a supermajority in both houses, plus the governor position. That's way too much power for any one organization. So what they do is they'll primary out anybody that doesn't toe the line and vote for these density laws. In the future, we're going to show you I've done the research to show how many of these are representatives, meaning Ben Allen and Al Martucci are voting yes on every one of these density laws to gut out your power and your safety. So you're going to hear some terminology. Some of the most prominent terminology, things that are going on, are things like RENA and housing element. What is that about? Well, what that is the state of California said, when the governor ran, he said, we need 3.5 million more housing units. And of course, the study came out and said, there's not even enough room in the state of California for 3.5 more million housing units. So then it became 2.5 million. And then that was audited, even by the state auditor, says that's not true. We don't need that. There's no allocation that shows we need that much more housing. But they did it anyway. And they took that 2.5 million and they split it up, allocated it among our cities. That's called a RENA allocation. Each city you live in has a certain amount. Palos Verdes Estates has 200. Rancho has about 650. Then they have to allocate for. So when you hear the housing element, well, what is the housing element? Well, what this is each city is required by the state to do something called a housing plan. And now they've obligated each city to rezone to allow high density, low income housing and using your RENA allocation. And so if you don't do it, there's two ways that they hit the cities. Number one, you're subject to builder's remedy projects. I'm going to explain that in just a moment because you've probably heard that. And the other is fines that go from $10,000 a month to $600,000 a month that can be imposed by the state. That is coming. So, builder's remedy projects. What do these look like? Well, you're starting to see them popping up in RPV. There's one residential lot, which is 3/4 of an acre. That's 33,000 square feet. And they are going to build a 13-story, 80-unit building. Now you're probably wondering, wait a minute, where is this? This is not that big of a lot, not for something that big. And of course, they're not going to be able to get in and out of there quickly. This is an ultra-high fire zone. It is a earthquake zone. It is a flood zone, and it is a slide zone. The trifecta, the quadfecta of danger. In addition to that, of course, that's true of all 4 cities in PV. We also have limited ingress-egress. So you're not going to be able to get out quickly, especially if you're in this building and you're trying to get out and you're trying to drive down PV Drive East on the switch packs, that's where it's at. And in addition to that, they're not going to be able to get anybody in to help you as well, because it's just not going to happen quickly. That's not far from where the land movement is. A second one that's happening is near Silver Spur Elementary. This is a 500-unit project that's on 2 single residential lots. This one is 8 stories high and 4 stories of underground parking. And they stretch out 4 long buildings, and the way to get in and out is at either end. It's like a street that goes through all 4 lined up, and either end. One end, the street to get out is on Ironwood, is the size of a regular driveway. So you can imagine this is a death trap. And it's in a gully, and of course you know we don't have very strong soil here. So, and we don't even know what their soil testing is. But once again, safety becomes an issue for them as well as the residents around them. Of course, when they build these, if you have any view, it's completely obliterated and you have no view rights. So what you're probably used to is that when somebody builds in your city, they go to like the planning commission and they go through a process. So the neighbors know what's happening and they can speak up. You have no means to speak up. These projects, Builder's Remedy, are rubber stamped at the counter. The only thing you can do on that is object through something called objective standards. That is just something we at Preserve PVE looked up. We started looking at the laws going, what can we do here? And so in our city, PVE, we went forward and advocated these objective standards. And this puts in some safety requirements that they have to abide by at the desk when they go in front of the city. They just go to the front desk and they get rubber stamped there. But at least if they have some objective standards, they have to go by them. So I'll tell you more about that next week. This is just kind of an introduction, as Sandy said. This is an excellent question. As you know, there's 4 cities on the Hill. One is Rolling Hills, and they got their housing element approved very quickly and put them in a special place. But what's happening now at the state is they're slowly approving these and taking like 6 months to approve housing elements, thereby elongating the process where you're subjected to these builder's remedy projects, which means they can go in, anybody can go on an R1 lot and overrule any local zoning and put almost anything there as tall as they want. That's how crazy it is. So Rolling Hills did a good job of putting it in a special place. I believe RPV, Rancho, tried to put it in some special places and the state wouldn't approve. And then they had to move them into less special places that are easier to build on. So the builder's remedies that are happening right now in Rancho have nothing to do with the housing element because they're just exposed and people are just coming along and starting to put these projects in. I think RPV is probably about 4 months away from getting approval if I watch them. Question?
I apologize, I missed the rationale for this. So the state is forcing this for money, and that's because they're bankrupt? Or, I mean, what is the rationale?
Bankrupt is caused by bad spending practices. And in terms of why is the state doing this, my observation is possibly 2 things, and this is what I think is happening. One is they're getting the re-election campaign coffers filled by developers and investors. BlackRock as an investor is a really big one that's putting money into their coffers, and other such organizations. CalPERS, the retirement fund, wants this, and big tech is also filling their coffers, and they're all for developing on the coastline because this is about money. Teachers, yeah, but not directly. It's CalPERS, and CalSTRS, which is the investment funds, are looking to put their money into. Ultimately, where they want to go is corporate housing for everybody as rentals and get rid of single home ownership. That's ultimately where they want to go. But you've got to consider another thing, and I'm just putting this together. When we heard Alex Villanueva speak, he mentioned to us, in LA County alone, we had a million people undocumented previously. Now that the borders are open, he said, we're up to 2 million just in LA County. Well, you can imagine what that is just for the state of California, and that was last fall. They need homes. They need homes. And they're advancing ACA 10, which is housing as a right. Once that passes, housing becomes a right, but then they've got to figure out how to finance it, so then they'll put through more laws. So that's what I'm putting together as a theory as to where this is ultimately going. And of course, they're changing who votes and how they vote. Any other questions? Yes. Who's going to be Mike Griffith is an ex-mayor of Torrance, or council person. I can't remember if he was mayor. And he has been involved in this, and he has his own organization to roll back local control. He'll be one of the members. I'm trying to get a member from Our Neighborhood Voices, who has a ballot initiative to roll back local control in 2026. And then a local, a land use attorney who has fought for, who is fighting for against the Silver Spur project. If you guys are familiar with that, 500 units. The land use attorney fighting against that for the residents there. And he also represented St. Francis Church, not to be part of high density housing. He was the attorney for them as well. Sure, question?
I'm just curious where the special place.
A city must rezone for a certain amount of housing to get the state to approve their housing element. So they're no longer exposed to builder's remedy. But all they have to do is rezone it. The challenge we're having there is that the state has already shown what their next move is. And they've already shown it to the San Francisco area. And that is, if you don't build it, within by the way, this housing element is a cycle every 8 years. So they're coming back for more in the next chunk. So what they're making San Francisco do in the San Francisco area is you have to actually build it, or once again, they will lift it up and expose you to builder's remedy and these fines. So then they're going to force you to try to build it. I advocate that it should still be done on private land, because if you do it on public land, the public is going to have to pay for development of that. And that just adds on to the cost, the taxes for the residents. So I advocate rezoning on private land instead of public land. Whether it gets built and where that's going, hopefully we can do something and get an initiative passed so before all this happens. Yes, as you bring different people into different areas, they can run for city council positions. They can advocate more social spending, and they can have more influence as to what's happening locally. So if you look at how they've been transforming America, they did something to map every neighborhood in the entire United States. It's under city-data. And you can see how they have put every characteristic of each city and determining how they're going to change it. Yes, the way that the laws are is it says once you rezone for this high-density housing, you can build them at market rate. That has nothing to do with affordable housing. You can build it at market rate.
Right.
But they do say if you're willing to put 20% of affordable housing in there, then you can have special rights and build even more and more places as well. This series of 200 plus laws is doing a lot of different things. So they give it something, it's called a density bonus, that if you put that 20% in there of affordable housing, then you can do even additional things. No parking, in setbacks, 2 inches from the property line, all different kinds of things. But still, even though the cities are having to rezone for low-income housing, the places that they're rezoning for low-income housing are not obligated to build low-income housing. They can just do market rate density housing. That is going to be part of the next meeting, so that's a month away, and we'll give you some specific examples as to what we could do.
Thank you so much. I've been paying attention, specifically to PVPRWF, this is where I live. They already rezoned for the corner, right over here. Yeah, the city council. It's already been rezoned for it's a Christian Science monitor. Because the first places they go after are churches because they can. So, yes, people pay attention. It's happening. It's been happening for a while. At any rate, thank you, Des, for the teaser. I think you've really piqued everyone's interest, and I really appreciate how much effort you're putting into this. So, with that, for us to think about, we're going to break for lunch, and then we will hear from the wonderful Susan Shelley.